A reading by Eve Angelista. Each day is a new beginning. You can start fresh, anticipating what today will bring. Or you can just settle for yesterday's doubts, fears, or worries. Which road will you take? Do you take the path to the clear present or the shadows of the past?
Good morning again, everyone. I, as you know, am Carrie Bacquier, and I have been a member of this UUCA community for over 20 years. I am wife to Alex and mom to Rosie, Jules, and Ben. In early November 2018, I sat among you in one of these chairs, silently weeping, as I listened to a sermon on the long journey home, centered around Alzheimer's and memory, death and dying. I wept because just days earlier, my world had shifted on its axis, as my primary physician told me my brain showed patterns consistent with Alzheimer's. Having experienced increasing cognitive issues over the previous 2 years, my doctor's assessment both stoked my worst fears and confounded possibility. I knew something wasn't right. I knew my brain was struggling to keep up. Being a busy mom of tweens, working a full-time job, and volunteering in the community didn't quite explain it. And I was struggling to hold the facade that everything was all right. But Alzheimer's? At 43? How could that be? I was terrified by the implications, and the message of the sermon that day tapped into my raw heart. Little did I know this was only the beginning of what would be a long, hard struggle to recover my health. In fact, it was the start of a 3.5-year journey that brought me to the brink, challenged me in the most profound ways, and taught me some of the most important lessons of my life. In fact, I was broken down to my very essence. My illness channeled me into repeated crossroads, forcing me to choose between the darkness of fear and separation and the light of faith and connection. My healing came from choosing the light over and over. Although I trusted my primary physician, I knew I needed a second opinion. It took me several months to secure an appointment at the Memory Center at a renowned local hospital. During the appointment, my husband, mom, and I leaned in as the doctor shared his conclusion. It's not a question of if dementia, but which dementia. As his words sunk in, the oxygen left the room and devastation swept in. My head swirled even as I tried to maintain my composure and focus on the doctor's explanation of further diagnostics that would determine which dementia. We left armed with instructions and referral slips for 5 major diagnostics. One of these tests was a lumbar puncture used to assess spinal fluid for beta amyloid protein, an indicator of Alzheimer's. Also known as a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture is the process by which a very long, needle is inserted between the bones of the lower spine to extract cerebrospinal fluid. Approaching the day of the lumbar puncture in mid-February 2019, I was more anxious about the results rather than the procedure itself. But then my husband Alex and I were ushered into the chilly, off-white, sterile room with a tray of tools sitting ominously against the wall. The practitioner came in briskly with an air of clinical indifference and very quickly booted Alex out of the room because of his intolerance of large needles. He was told to wait in a room down the hall. This is how I found myself leaning over the patient table with my bare back exposed, breathing deeply to counter my quickening pulse. The darkness of fear and separation was palpable. Without Alex in the room, I felt untethered and more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. As the practitioner worked, silence reverberated off the walls. In what I call a God moment, I felt with the entirety of my soul the stark loneliness of all the people around the world going through illness and procedures like these without someone waiting in the next room over. With tears running down my face, grief, empathy, and compassion consumed me. And yet, knowing I could not, I should not linger too long here. I shifted into gratitude for Alex, my family, and all those who supported me. I latched onto a memory of a friend's young son, Lincoln, who had recently completed grueling and successful cancer treatment. I repeated to myself over and over, if baby Lincoln can do it, I can do it. If baby Lincoln can do it, I can do it. If baby Lincoln can do it, I can do it. I repeated these words until the procedure was done. While these choices got me through, the procedure was not without consequence. As a practitioner and I wrapped up our time together, she was completely apathetic to my concerns about the pain running down both my legs. And although I was told in advance that brief fatigue and headache were potential side effects of the lumbar puncture, I had no idea what freight train was barreling down the track. It did not take long for the exhaustion to set in. Exhaustion, not fatigue. And even that word does not capture the bone-sucking void of energy that stole my life force and would take years to return. The headache was blinding. 4 days later, spasms started running up and down my spine. Over the next 2 weeks, my body, my brain, and my nervous system continued to deteriorate. Lightning pain pulsed through my arms and legs. My ability to speak became spotty at best. An extreme hypersensitivity to light, sound, and motion forced me into literal darkness and isolation. What the heck was happening? The only context I had was not if dementia, but which dementia. Even though the trigger for the rapid decline was obvious, my limited understanding told me that this was the path to the end, my end. So let me take you back for a second, back to the early days, after being told my cognitive issues were associated with Alzheimer's, back to the beginning of the shock and despair. Even then, before things got a whole lot worse, I was having thoughts that shook me. Fleeting as these thoughts were, they gave me a clear understanding why people with terminal illness would want to take control and end their lives before the disease could. Yes, it is about the fear of the long drawn-out process of dying, but for me, it was something more. These thoughts stem from the horrible trauma I would be causing my children and loved ones. By forgetting them even while I still breathed, by stealing the right to a normal childhood, and by dying way too soon. Despite the total lack of reason, these thoughts of ending it made sense to me in small bursts of time. The tragic truth is that in 7th grade, I had a very close teenage friend of the family, James, commit suicide. The devastation of his actions on those he left behind has, for me, been a tether to this world over the years. And as I struggled with the prognosis of Alzheimer's, memories of James kept thoughts of ending it at bay. These thoughts held space in my brain only as long as it took to become aware of them. But then, that too changed. A few months after the lumbar puncture, on a warm spring day in April, I was still resisting my debilitating reality. So, foolishly, I accompanied my family to the local festival on the green. For me, it was a complete disaster. My sensory overload was almost immediately in high gear. At the same time, all my other symptoms escalated as well. My ability to even process thoughts went offline. My speech became more garbled and my fatigue was paralyzing. Yet, I fought to appear normal, to show up for my kids, to help them enjoy the fun of the festival. But I wasn't fooling anyone. I saw the confusion and fear on their faces. Upon returning home, I took some time to sit alone by the window in my bedroom, trying to reset. Instead, grief consumed me as I once again considered the trauma I was causing my kids. Those thoughts of ending it pushed to the forefront, and this time they lingered. This time they held space, and this time they took shape. Some part of me, beyond my body and brain, sensed the danger. The darkness of fear and separation was winning. Separation from any version of normal, from the person I once knew myself to be. Separation from anyone who could possibly understand. Then the memory of James spoke to me. If I wanted to get out of this, if I wanted to live, I needed to ask for help. Although Mom and Alex were downstairs, a mere holler away, I didn't have the strength or courage to call out to them. Instead, phone in hand, I called my best friend Eve. I knew she could hold it and guide me out, and she did. She listened, expressed empathy and concern, and sprung into action. Practically before I could blink, Eve, Alex, and Mom were in the bedroom helping me break free from darkness's grasp. Okay, now let's be real. It wasn't immediately rainbows and unicorns after that, not by any stretch of the imagination. However, this was a critical turning point in my healing journey as I began to intentionally choose life, faith, and reconnections with those who so deeply cared for me. I finally accepted that not only could they hold the weight of my internal world, but that I needed them. In faith, I chose to believe in others, in a power greater than myself, and that somehow, some way, we would make it through. In truth, this was just the beginning of my path to rediscovering holistic health. Health at the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. Across the past 3.5 years, with perseverance and grit, I've been able to bring most of my symptoms under control. The list of diagnoses and related medications is stunning. At the core of the problem was a rare form of stroke, Lyme disease, and mold illness. Along my journey to recovery, I came up against heart-wrenching, soul-testing challenges that chipped away at the learned exterior of who I believed myself to be, the layer of clay that I had masked myself with over the 40+ years of good times and bad. And like the Buddha in the earlier story, the clay began to fall away. All too often, the act of chipping away our outer layers of protection feels forced upon us by external pressures. I felt stripped bare by my choices for survival, my choices for living. It took time to recognize the gold underneath, the gold within that had always been there. As my healing progressed, hope bloomed that I could someday shift into a place of serving others. You see, in the process of approaching the precipice of life where I believed this was the end, I was tormented by knowing in my core that I had not fulfilled my soul purpose. I had not served the world in a way that I was meant to for the highest good. I carried this knowing with me, and as I began to feel significantly better, I started to ponder, how could I best live out my soul purpose? How could I use what I learned from my experience to help others who are scared and alone feel heard and seen? How could I make their journey a little bit easier? What I concluded is that at the crossroads of my skills and experience, I am uniquely suited to serve as a chronic illness ally who uses coaching to empower those with long-term health challenges to move out of fear, isolation, and overwhelm into hope, healing, and thriving so that they too can reclaim a life that they love. With 20 years under my belt as a project manager, I know how to help people get in touch with what they want and bridge the gap between where they are now and where they want to be. Through my health trials and tribulations, I have the power of empathy, compassion, and hindsight to help others move through the similar situations. This is my gold. Now, as a chronic illness coach, I partner with my clients in navigating their own crossroads so that they too can break free from the darkness and step into the light. This is my soul calling. This is my heart song. This is a life I love. While my story is unique, there are universal threads. The reality is that we all face gut-wrenching challenges throughout our lives that put us at crossroads. And we all face a choice at these crossroads. The choice to allow grief and despair to consume us, or to have faith in the interconnected web that binds us all together. This is not about denying the very real feelings of loss and loneliness, rather about choosing to believe you can and will get through them. We must find a way to trust that the things that feel like they are breaking us down are in fact helping us to reconnect to the beautiful golden self within. So, in closing, I ask each of you, what are the crossroads you are navigating? How will you break free from the darkness of fear and separation and step into the light of faith and connection? How will you allow the gold within to shine through? Thank you.